so much for coming and making the time to hear what the other candidates and I had to say. And thank you also for helping this organization select its next leader. I have been asked to speak with you today about my thoughts on building a sustainable, mission-driven organization in a time of VUCA. That's volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And I can't tell you, actually, there's not much more that floats my professional boat than being asked for my opinion and being granted a captive audience. So I can't wait to start delving into some of the strategies and foundation that I hope to share with you today. But first, I really want to start with a story. Let me just preface this story by saying I had a very untraditional upbringing. My parents worked for an international development organization, and we traveled around quite a bit. When I was 8, my family moved to Côte d'Ivoire, which is a country on the west coast of Africa. My dad's work took him to the village of Brogo in the middle of the country, while my mom, whose work was to financially underwrite my dad's work, remained in the capital of Abidjan, about a 6.5 very bumpy, very long bus ride away. My brother and I stayed in the village with my dad, and I think that my parents' hope was that we would start picking up some French, which is the official language of Côte d'Ivoire. But we got along just fine with the other kids. We didn't need any French, and they mostly spoke their indigenous languages when they were playing together. So no French was acquired for a couple months, and eventually my parents decided, French or no French, it was time. We needed to start going to school. The closest appropriate one was in Bouaké, a city a half an hour away, a distance that I thought was reasonable to travel, but honestly would have been extravagant to travel twice daily using the one rattle-trap van which served the project. The solution was to find a host family for my brother and me who would put us up in Bouaké during the school week. The family, though nice enough, were complete and utter strangers to us. So, the day arrived to start school. I put on my brand new uniform. It was a blue gingham, which is the national uniforms of schoolgirls there, and walked into the principal's office with my parents in total terror. My parents kissed me goodbye, waved me off, and I was led to my classroom by a French-speaking stranger. And I just remember being introduced to the class, and there was just this room full of gaping eyes staring at me. I remember in very vivid detail that extremely long day. From the classmates all nattering at me during the recess breaks, and I just was mute in terror. I remember the teacher giving instructions that prompted immediate action in everybody but me while I was sitting around trying to figure out what to do. I remember being navigating a completely different classroom and educational culture than the one from inner city Chicago that I had just come from, and being expected to write with the fountain pen that was placed in my hand. At the end of that very long day, I took my brother's hand and we bravely headed to our new home. This arrangement lasted for about 1.5 years, seeing our dad on the weekends and our mom about every few months, and living in a city apart from both of them. It was an incredibly hard time, as you can imagine, for an 8-year-old. But I learned a lot. I did learn how to speak French with native fluency. I learned how to make friends with people from around the world when all you have in common is a desire to communicate and to play. I learned that the bonds of family are durable and they can stretch much farther than you think. And I learned about my own capabilities, my own internal strength, which I could count on to carry me through that difficult time, as well as other hard times to come. I had to tell this story because when I read the subject for the presentation, I had to smile. All of my growing up years were like this, subject to radical change and volatility, being just plunged into new circumstances and environments, and being expected to pick it up pretty quickly. And I did. I learned to adapt quickly to thrive. VUCA is what I know through and through. And I believe that it's what helps me be the kind of leader that's needed in today's environment. Now, I do promise I will get to these strategies and the foundation that I want to talk about, but before we delve into those, I do think it's important for us to just take a step back and look at the wider context. So let's spend some time talking about this ever-shifting environment in which we find ourselves swimming. When I think of the future for senior services, I get deeply excited. Retirement age was set at 65 in 1935, when average life expectancy was 58 for the men and 62 for the ladies. Whoop! Today, it's 75 and 81 respectively, and those folks are active for decades past when they first get their first welcome letter from the AARP. I actually just got back from a canoe camping trip with my parents, as well as my family, up to Ross Lake in the North Cascades. And they both celebrated their 68th birthdays when they were out there. It was really fun. We surprised my mom with balloons in the middle of the wilderness. They may have a few tweaks here and there in their bodies that they have to manage, but for the most part, they are more active than ever, and they have no rocking plans in their future, no rocking chair plans. My dad's taken up long-distance bicycling and always is emailing me about the latest 60-mile trip he went on. And he's also started a Whole Foods plant-based diet. My mom is in her 16th year of studying and learning Tai Chi and teaching it as well. The longevity of senior years and the activity levels that they expect will completely change the field of aging. And this will be true for beyond the boomer bulge that we spend so much time talking about. This longevity is often discussed as if it were a problem, and from a financial standpoint, I have to concede there's some concerns there. But equally true are the rich potential contributions from these wise elders. What a force of wisdom and perspective they have to offer us, especially in this era of volatility and uncertainty. Imagine if senior services could be an integral part in engaging those veterans of life. Certainly it would be a start if we began observing the many ways in which older adults are service givers as well as service receivers, and incorporating that into our approach. Okay, so let's get down to the strategies or ideas. I think these would be sustaining for any nonprofit, but drawing on my almost 6 years of experience at senior services, these would be the top 3 that I would recommend pursuing. They are 1, growing passionate evangelists for our cause. 2, diversifying a stable revenue picture. And 3, innovating in our field, because really there is no one better positioned to do this than we are. Let's dive into the first idea, growing passionate evangelists for our cause. The strength of a mission-driven organization such as ours rests with its committed supporters. It's what I really love about this work. We simply cannot exist without the community's support, whether that support looks like public funding through our contracts, time spent driving a widow to her ophthalmologist, agencies partnering with us to work for social justice, or a donor who's moved to write a check after seeing the way we've cared for his aging neighbor. We exist at the pleasure of our community, but we thrive when our community is passionately in love with the work that we do, when they are evangelists for our cause. An organization that has accomplished a great deal with this emphasis is Habitat for Humanity. They don't build affordable houses in the easiest or the most efficient way. They build houses in a way that builds evangelists for the movement of affordable housing. While they raise walls, they are also raising advocates who go on to talk about Habitat for Humanity at a cocktail party, who will write a letter to their congressperson in support of affordable housing, and who will welcome Tent City at a church in their neighborhood. To find and grow these ambassadors, we need to tell a better story. The last two organizations I worked with both had somewhat unusual names: Rite of Passage Journeys and Wilderness Awareness School. And I came to expect just being peppered with questions when I'd go to trainings and conferences, and people would want to know all kinds of things about my work. So imagine my surprise when I proudly put on my name tag as the director of Snow Valley Senior Center and walked into my first conference. You could actually hear the thud in the conversation when people found out where I worked and what I did. People were so locked into their story about work with seniors, what work with seniors entailed, and I was completely underprepared to help them move beyond that story. I think we all do that, and I know we can do better. We need a unifying, overarching message that inspires us about the important work we're doing, and one that when we tell it to others, it makes our whole face light up and makes our listeners lean in to ask another question. We also need to look at how we engage donors and our volunteers and increase their numbers. We touch lives all around us. See, look, there's a donor. They just walked in the door. Done. And all of those lives are intertwined with their communities. Their concerned neighbor, their worried mosque, their grateful grandson, the relieved local fire department. Our impact is felt far beyond the bounds of the individual client helped, but we fall short of engaging those stakeholders and transforming their gratitude into help for other seniors in need. Engaging those stakeholders could build up our base of support, and that support is what sustains us. The second idea I want to explore this morning is diversifying our revenue. Historically, programs for which we could receive public support or government contracts were the ones that we tended to pursue. This has served us well, and it has led us to a position of strength, but it has also left us less skilled at pursuing other important income possibilities. Diverse revenue income streams can withstand sudden shifts in funding sources and allow us to remain stable and focused on our mission. There are three areas of growth that I propose we pursue. A, individual donors, one of the most stable, reliable funding sources out there, enabling us to do creative work that isn't specifically contract funded. B, strategic, beneficial partnerships with corporations. While we do have to be careful not to exploit the seniors that come to us for help, there is a lot of space between that and what we do currently. And those partnerships could provide a mostly passive income stream that could help us touch more lives. C, programs we can replicate to scale, modeled after the excellent pioneering work done by Enhanced Fitness. We have in our hands a roadmap of how to grow a small, terrific program into one that is saving lives across the country. And we have experts on our staff who know how to help us develop the next one. So if that's not a winning combination for increased revenue, I don't know what is. These three revenue areas and others that you may have in mind create balance on our spreadsheets, and more importantly, offer us freedom and flexibility to pursue what our community needs and our mission dictates, not our bottom line. Not only our bottom line. Which leads me right into the third idea I'd like to explore with you. Unleashing our agency's strength in order to innovate in the field of aging. I believe that there is dormant among us the seeds for groundbreaking ways to meet the needs of our aging population and their current ones. We count among our strengths over 280 employees, thousands of volunteers, and we carry with us a rich history of meeting the needs of seniors. I don't know exactly what that innovation will look like. It's beyond the scope of this presentation, but there are some really ideas, I believe, in the strategic plan. It could mean co-creating a program with one of our partners who's especially skilled at working with a traditionally underserved community, lending our experience and our time, and then setting that program free because our partner can meet those needs more effectively. It might mean developing a 6-week curriculum for boomers, modeled after the evidence-based support groups such as Powerful Tools for Caregivers, which some of you may be familiar with, which not only walks them through preparing for the aging journey, but it connects them to each other and to aging resources in their community. It might look like promoting a buddy system, where we get to play matchmaker and link up a younger senior with an older senior, each bringing different gifts to the relationship. As the younger senior drives his buddy to the grocery store, he can learn firsthand about some of the challenges he'll face and probably get a heck of a story out of it in the meantime. What I do know is that looking for ways that we can help people support people, where we nurture the growth of relationships and then stand out of the way, that is when we'll be the most effective, and that is when we'll be the most sustainable, especially in this era of shrinking public funds and increasing aging population. What will be essential to success in innovation, however, is being willing to let down our protective guard for our own programs and centers and locations, to support a new program without viewing it as a threat to our own. Shaking ourselves up geographically, programmatically, creatively, can shake loose what the future is calling for. And the amazing thing is we have the size, the resources, and the stability to really put our shoulder behind new initiatives and pull them off if we leverage our collective resources and all dig in behind it. This time of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity is also a deep time of creativity, reinvention, and possibility. Our organization must be willing to evolve along with our seniors. And I know from working with many of you over the last 6 years, we've got what it takes. There's one more thing I want to talk about that I believe is essential in building sustainability, and that's the foundation of relationships. In an organization this large, this spread out, and this diverse, we must tend to our relationships. I'm including in that relationships with our organizational partners, relationships with our funders, relationships with our contractors, relationships with our community. I'm also including the relationships between each other. The gaps that naturally exist between us can become either widening chasms where our work seems more and more distant from the other, or they can become sacred space between us, allowing us to meet in the middle with our differences as a gift. I know what kind of organization I would rather be working in. And I also know that where relationships are tended and opportunities to gather are welcomed, durable, intangible bonds can grow. And these bonds allow us to pull together as one, especially so in a time of vulnerability and volatility. I also believe in the strength of our relationships with those we serve. We must stay grounded in the work through our staff and our volunteers who are performing the actual one-on-one service. That is where the magic in our organization happens. When the actual human-to-human connection takes place. When a program coordinator at a center sits in quiet witness with a woman whose husband is dying. When a Hyde shuttle driver assists with dignity one of his regulars using a walker for the very first time. When one of our social workers provides information so needed, it causes the caregiver daughter to burst into tears with relief. That is the work that we do, and we cannot lose sight of it. I know for a fact that the 2 drivers who serve our center, Denise McKinney and John Quall, are my 2 most reliable sources of information. They can tell me how seniors are doing, they can tell me how the seniors think the center is doing, They can tell me if the plan that I'm kind of got in the works is a complete cockamamie idea or if it's one that actually might help somebody. I've learned to listen to them. In an organization our size, as we move through a time of complexity, we cannot lose touch with that important knowledge base or with one another. The work we do together matters. It will continue to matter for a long time into the future. And I believe that we have so much potential left to reveal. It would be a real privilege to lead this organization into that future. Thank you. Now we get to the more exciting part of the conversation when it becomes a conversation instead of my megaphone, much as I like that megaphone, my husband would like me to say. So do people have any questions or comments, things that I sparked? It's light.
Hi, I'm Margaret. Can you tell us a little bit about your background prior to coming to work for the Senior Center?
Sure, yeah. I have spent my entire career in the field of mission-driven or nonprofits. I started out as a volunteer coordinator when I was in college and have followed in those, in that kind of vein of work ever since. I was a program intern, then coordinator, then director at an organization called the Institute of Cultural Affairs, where I first started in Chicago and then moved to Seattle, and became really passionate about supporting the good work that I saw my peers wanting to do and got really interested in fundraising. So I got my fundraising certificate from the University of Washington and got a job as the development director of Wilderness Awareness School. Worked there for several years and then applied for the job at the Senior Center. And I think they really liked the dollars that they saw in my resume that first time.
You have some, being the director of Snow Valley Senior Center, some inside knowledge about the senior services also, that you know how it functions, what are the programs. So if you were the CEO, what are the first couple of things you may like to do to take you to the next level you have been talking about in your presentation?
I think the first thing that I'd like to do is just spend some time getting to know folks and traveling out to the different locations, traveling out to visit funders, traveling out to visit partners, spending some time in those locations. I do know senior services, but I'm most familiar with my senior center, and I would want to make sure that I was really educating myself about what all of the programs and activities we do are, and just meeting people, having them get to know me, and working with the board to establish what their priorities are for me, really focused on building those relationships. I would spend a lot of time with the executive team, the other directors, the leadership team, learning from them what their hopes were for the agency and assessing where the collective vision was. I know that there has been a lot of time spent on thinking about a strategic plan. So looking at that strategic plan, thinking about how it would be implemented over time and beginning to get buy-in from all of us in terms of moving forward with that.
I have a question. I hear a lot of talk over the last few years about developing corporate partnerships, and you being in an outlying area and the abundance of opportunities within the downtown corridor with lots of high-end corporations in communications, legal field, and other areas. What is your familiarity with dealing with corporations on a large scale since you're out in such a remote area?
That's a great question. I have done a lot of work at the Snow Valley Senior Center in working with sponsors and other partnerships, but they certainly aren't to the scale of downtown. So some of what I would be doing is developing those relationships and meeting people who could connect me to those more higher level corporations. I feel comfortable walking into people's offices with an introduction and beginning that conversation. I think that one of the advantages that we have as an organization is that we have a lot to offer corporations. Seniors and the changes that they expect to go through, there are a lot of corporations who would like to get their products in front of those. There's a lot of money to be made on seniors. And of course, I'm not talking about exploitation, but using the advantages we have of lots of folks that they'd like access to and leveraging in that so that we make sure that it's a beneficial partnership to us. I think that we would create that in a mutually evolving way. But yeah, it would be meeting folks who could introduce me to other folks, that kind of thing. And that's why one of the first things I would do is to really focus on building those relationships and connections.
Just as a quick follow-up,
Yeah.
many of the corporations in the Seattle area and throughout the country require their employees to volunteer for an organization before they donate to them.
Mm-hmm.
So have you considered that idea, or did you know of that? And are there ways you might have of getting in to recruit volunteers, specific corporations that would become eligible for funding?
I think that an easy first step would be finding out who our volunteers work for. And I'm not sure we collect that information. That's not something I have access to, but we already have quite a few volunteers. I imagine they're plugged into our local businesses, and starting there, making sure that we're advertising that we're looking for that would be a real first start. And then there's all kinds of employee communications that go out, employee fairs, and looking carefully at how we spend our time on those, because they can be a big time-consuming activity, but thinking carefully about what organizations we really want to target, and then trying to get in front of those employees. We have a whole array of volunteer opportunities that have a lot of interest to many people, and so I think we'd be able to create a couple opportunities that would have a lot of appeal to those employees.
Hi, Omar. Thanks for your lively and thoughtful presentation. You've given some thought to this position. You've been working in the field for a while. You seem to understand the role. As you envision yourself in the role of CEO, what would you say would be your top 2 or 3 challenges, just in terms of what you bring to the job versus what the job will require of you?
I think that one of the challenges would be the increased scale of the organization. There's a big jump between the size of organization I work with now and the size of the organization that Senior Services is. And I gave a lot of thought before I applied because I wanted to make sure that I really that I could make that transition. And I think one of the ways that I felt confident about that was knowing what a stable and skilled executive leadership and director team exists and the longevity that they have. And so knowing that that I had a good team to support me is one of the big helps, but that would certainly be one of them. I have, on a smaller scale, a lot of experience with when you are a leader of an organization like this. I call it having there are 2 of you. There's the one that you know that you are, of who you are, and then there's the other one that walks around without your permission in people's conversations and people's imaginations, and you have not much control over that other second person that's out there. You just have to, count on what you're doing, and people will say what they'll say. So I think I mentioned that because I think that might be a concern that people have is, would I be able to manage myself and have the pressure of so many eyes and expectation? And I live in a small town, and there are people with a lot of time on their hands, and I'm well familiar with the experience of knowing what I know to be true and being okay with this second Amara that kind of prances around. You asked for 3 things. I think the third is the complexity of this organization. I have my one perspective, which I know to be one perspective, and I'm sure if I'm selected as the CEO, once I get in that position, a whole new wave of relationships and expectations and complexity will reveal itself. And so learning how to manage myself while I'm kind of riding those waves, learning who are great people to listen to and who are people who might have another agenda, I think would be one of the challenges.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Mark. So you've been out in the sticks for a while. What kind of ideas, what kind of successes are you having in reaching people who live in the rural areas? And how would you bring those ideas to senior services?
That's a great question. One of the experiences, one of the things that I value that I've learned from living in Carnation, for those of you who don't know, Carnation is about 45 minutes to an hour from here, out in the rural East King County area. And one of the things that I've learned is how fiercely proud people in rural areas are of their communities. They are much more interested in something that comes from themselves than they are in accepting help from an outside source. And we were able to leverage that very effectively in the work that we did there in terms of coming up with things that we did, or when we did bring in an outsider, really getting out in front with a message about how this is a great partner and they're approved by us, and they're a trusted partner. And so I think respecting that autonomy, respecting that fierce independence and pride, and finding those key players out in those rural communities, which frankly is the same approach that I would take for traditionally underserved communities within Seattle, is learning who those organizations are that's trusted by that community, and first working with that and gaining that organization, that leadership's trust, and working with them in partnership, and developing something that they say will work for them, and having that be the focus and emphasis, as opposed to us coming in with our big program to rescue the poor isolated rural seniors.
Good morning. I'm Christina Vasconcelos, CEO, Executive Director of FIAP. Denise Klein is very known and well connected, knows a lot of people. How do you plan on matching that up?
That's a good question. Yeah, she was. I can't compete with 60 years of experience, which she had when she was starting. Again, I would rely on the relationships that already exist. One I count as one of my skills is making connections with people, being able to pick up the phone, have lunch with somebody, and really find that thing that connects us together. And so I would start with the people that I know and really actively pursue those relationships. And then also just picking up the phone with kind of the key players in the area. And if I don't have a connection to them, just picking up the phone and asking them for lunch. I mean, it starts so simply, right? Relationships that are very complex, a big organization, really, it's essentially one human being meeting with another human being for some caffeine infusion. And so that would be my approach. I would walk in awareness that I'm a newbie, as you said, and so I would walk in with some humility and, wanting to learn from them, and offering, what we have as an agency to share with them.
Hi, Mara. Thank you for your presentation. This is more like a situation. As you know, community dining, we are towards the end of the year, going towards the end of the year. We are projected to overperform. So on one hand, we have some money to support that overperformance. On the other hand, we have staff who are underpaid for 2 years or so, and where we have a question of retaining good staff. So, and if we pay the staff, then we are not able to, we might have to cut the meals, serving meals to the seniors towards the end of the year. So in that case, what would be your pride? Which one would be your pride?
I will answer your question directly in a minute, but I will say that this is a great example when I talk about we need to tell a better story. The fact that we are overperforming and feeding more hungry seniors than we're getting paid for, and we are just doing it because that's what needs to be done, that's a story that can be told. I know I made a point of sending that information on to my board because one of the things I've strove over is to create a good relationship with the board, and I thought that they needed to know, like, here's a great thing, senior services is just shelling out this money, people are flocking to our lunch program, and senior services deserves some credit for that. I think that people love their senior lunch program in their communities, and if we let everybody know, hey, we aren't being paid for all of these lunches, do you want us to stop serving lunches to your hungry neighbors, or could you support that effort in reaching that higher level of service? And so that, for me, that's a perfect example of, I think there are many ways that we can look at what we're doing and talk about it in a way that gets people excited and wants to help support it. So we don't have so many questions of, hungry seniors, lose staff. It's a really tough place to be in. I think, when you're looking at retaining staff, you want to look at how much does it cost to get a new staff? Just from a very numbers and cents perspective, recruiting, training, retaining, and people love their cooks. There's a real, I think people love our cook more than they love me. They're always telling me, never lose Jennifer, which is great, But I think if you made a plan to increase funding for community dining, you might be able to approach some of those staff and say, I know you are underpaid, you are incredibly valued. We're facing this tough decision, not feeding more seniors who walk in our doors or keeping our wages static, which we know are not adequate. Will you please work with us? Can you give us 2 years, and we will really work hard to get you up to a more livable wage. And make a plan with them and get them on board with that, and then work like the Dickens to make that happen.
Yeah, I have one question. When you kept mentioning the fact that senior services have been increasing and developing and producing all these things that what senior services is, how would you enhance all those resources as far as IT, getting that information out within the organization and also outside?
Would you mind just rephrasing? So I think what you're asking me is, we do a lot of things in our organization and we're serving more people, and how do we use IT to strengthen that?
Enhance it.
Enhance it.
As far as, for example, the organization out in Snow Valley or West Seattle Senior Center, if they need information, who are being directly served, who are being underserved, and who are not being served.
So collecting better data to serve the people that need it most. One of the things that I had to cut out of my presentation because it was way too long was a little paragraph on how important I think it is for us to be okay with investing in our infrastructure and our overhead. And collecting better data is one of the things that we could do if we invested more into that overhead, which sometimes it feels like it's taking away from that one-to-one service, but in the long run enables us to meet the needs of more people. So I don't have a specific answer for you, but I know that Salesforce has some incredible capabilities, which is the database system that we're using, and it's becoming a unified platform. And supporting centers and programs and locations in knowing how to use that effectively would be a great way to do it. I know I'm always hampered by not good enough data when I'm trying to apply for grants, when I'm trying to write fundraising letters, when I'm trying to communicate effectively and make the case. And then the other thing is, there's lots of great data out there. And I am not a skilled data person, but I know there are people who really love data. I know it enough to know that I like what it can do for us. And so again, being able to, have a quick list of resources, not resources, excuse me, but numbers and statistics can be really helpful. In the past, I've relied a little bit on the resource development department here at Senior Services for some of that when I'm writing grants, because they have some sense of that for their granting capabilities. But I agree with you, we could do a lot more there. Did I answer your question? Okay, thank you.
So I'd like to sort of imagine a scenario, if you will, that you've been engaged as the executive director and you're meeting with a board or a subcommittee of the board, and they're saying, well, we need a way to evaluate your performance.
Mine?
Yes.
Okay.
So you're a year from now, we'll be evaluating you against these. What kinds of things do you think you should be evaluated against?
That's a great question. There's the bottom line. That's a real good place to start. How are we doing financially speaking? Are our numbers up? Are our numbers down? Are we going the right direction? I think there's a kind of a taking the pulse of how folks are feeling in the agency, about my leadership, about where the agency is going. Is there unity? Is there consensus? Is there a sense of enthusiasm and excitement about where we're going? Did I make some major blunders that I didn't do good repair work on with people? That would be important. I think calling up a few of our outside relationships and seeing how I'm comporting myself there, whether they trust me and therefore the agency. Certainly how the board is doing, how relationships are there, are people coming to board meetings feeling engaged, feeling like their gifts are being used, feeling like initiatives are being followed through on. I think the agencies, and by agency I mean all the people in the organization's continued commitment to social justice is an important one, whether that continues to build and strengthen. And I think it would be really helpful to ask the seniors themselves that we're serving, what do they think of the services that they're receiving? What would they like more of? Have they felt a retrenchment in terms of what we're able to do? And I think asking volunteers as well. Do they feel engaged? Do they feel purposefully used? Do they feel appreciated? Do they feel an active part of what we're doing here? Do they feel like sort of the extras on the set?
Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit about challenges you've had in your work life around cultural competency?
Sure. So I love the work of social justice. I think it's really important. And it was one of the things that attracted me to Senior Services in the first place. It was kind of right as we were getting started, maybe year two. And I thought it was really cool when I read it on the agency communication page. And, but I work in the Snow Valley Senior Center, which is a very rural, very Caucasian, somewhat insulated community. And the people that I work with are primarily from that area. And a lot of them had a really different response to this cultural competence initiative. They didn't see why it was so important. They felt like it took away money and resources from the real work. They've been to all those trainings already. They know all about it, and they're not a racist, right? So why do we have to do all of this stuff? And it has been really a good experience for me to figure out how to work with that and shift that a little bit at a time and a little bit at a time. And to encourage those who are really on the bandwagon to keep moving forward and, help along the people who are not 100% on board with it, kind of move a little bit more toward understanding why this was important for us to be doing together. So I think it would be, that I think is actually a very valuable experience in terms of moving into the CEO role, because it can be, because I have my own sense of importance, but I also can hold the perspective of folks who really don't get it, and have really worked to wrap my mind around what experiences and understanding they have that allows them to have such resistance to it.
I think this will need to be the last question because we're bumping up against the all-important lunch.
Don't want to hold you back from that. I know that's a really bad plan.
Hi, Amara, thank you. Can you talk a little bit about the board and about board development and some things that you see as opportunities and some things you see as challenges with developing board?
I love working with board members. I think it's really fun, and it's also really supporting to know that all of the decisions and all of the movement in an organization doesn't just have to happen in one head, that there's a group of people who are really putting their best intention, best efforts, best thinking into strategy for an organization and how to move forward. And it's fun. It's fun wrestling, mentally, intellectually with problems and challenges and coming up with solutions. I think that one of the strengths of boards in general is that they can draw on many people in your community. So, we've talked just here about seniors, corporations, we've talked about donors, we've talked about volunteers, and I think consciously cultivating a board that draws on all of those different levels of where the organization touches is one of the challenges and gifts. And it can be challenging because one of the things you need from board members is the ability to connect you, open doors, introduce you to people. But if you get a board full of people who are operating at that level, you lose a really important perspective of folks anchored in the community, anchored in the work, who can just help the agency keep their feet on the ground in terms of what things mean. And I know on our board we've always sought that balance. So who are the folks that are movers and shakers and know a lot of people in the community? And who are the seniors who come to our center on a regular basis? Who are the volunteers who spend time talking with seniors, who can really reflect back like, whoa, you guys, this is nutso, this thing you're doing. We had a great example of that. I was all hot to trot on turning our newsletter into a once a quarter newsletter. And I thought it made a lot of sense financially, and I had all these reasons. And a lot of the board members who are not as intimately engaged with the day-to-day of the senior center said, they said that was great. And one board member who's a regular volunteer said, this is not a good idea, and laid out a case. So we were able to kind of take a pause on that initiative. So being able to do both of those, it's really important to having both. And then also making sure that there's something for board members to do that actually has merit and value and is of import, and not just coming up with busy tasks that don't actually impact the direction of the agency, I think is really important. We all want to feel like we're necessary and valued and that our time is useful. And so figuring out for each board member what that thing is that they really love to do, what they're really good at, and plugging them in there and checking with them and keeping them engaged in that way.
Thank you so much.